It was supposed to be the happiest day of my son's life. Sunlight streamed through the grand bay window of our living room, illuminating the white silk drapes and the pristine floral arrangements that scented the air with jasmine and roses. Everywhere I looked, there were touches of perfection. Garrett's tuxedo hanging crisp and ready, the catering staff buzzing quietly in the kitchen, the soft strains of a string quartet rehearsing in the garden. Just hours before the wedding, I walked into that very living room, my heart swelling with a mother's pride and a wife's contentment, only to find my husband, Arthur, entangled with Brenda, our son Garrett's fiancée. The world didn't just stop, it fractured. A delicate porcelain vase dropped onto a marble floor. Arthur's hands were on Brenda's waist, his lips dangerously close to hers, a look of illicit pleasure on his face that turned instantly to horror as he saw me. Brenda, usually so poised and self-assured, froze, her eyes wide like a cornered deer, a faint lipstick smudge on the corner of Arthur's mouth mirroring the one on her own. My breath hitched, a silent scream lodging in my throat. My perfect life, the one I had meticulously crafted over 30 years, crumbled into dust before my eyes, taking with it every cherished memory, every shared laugh, every quiet evening. For a long moment, silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Arthur stammered, his face blanching. "Lorraine, it's not what it looks like." Brenda, recovering her composure with unnerving speed, tried to pull away, her hand reaching for Arthur's arm in a gesture that was far too intimate for a mere misunderstanding. But it was already too late. The image was seared into my mind, an ugly, festering wound on the fabric of my reality. My vision blurred, tears stinging my eyes, yet I couldn't look away from the tableau of their betrayal. It was then that Garrett appeared, emerging from the hallway with a somber, knowing look that pierced through my shock. He hadn't needed to say a word for me to know he'd witnessed it too. Or perhaps something more. He walked past Brenda, ignoring her frantic, whispered apologies, and stood beside me, his hand finding mine. His grip was firm, grounding me amidst the swirling chaos. Then, he leaned in, his voice a raw, desperate whisper that cut through the haze of my disbelief, each word a cold shard of ice. "Mom, I already know, and it's worse than you think." His confession wasn't just a confirmation of the affair. It was an ominous prelude, a chilling whisper of depths yet unknown. The shared shock between us, mother and son, was immediate and profound, binding us in a silent pact against the monstrous lie that had just detonated in our living room. My heartbreak deepened, but a new, steely resolve began to form beneath the surface of my despair. This wasn't just about Arthur and Brenda anymore. This was about everything. Garrett's raw whisper, a truth more potent than any scream, ripped open not just the present, but also the carefully constructed vault, where I had buried years of subtle anxieties about Arthur and our seemingly perfect life. For too long I had dismissed them as the natural ebb and flow of a long marriage, the occasional coldness, the growing distance. But now, in the stark light of his confession, those faint whispers of unease transformed into a deafening roar. Arthur had changed, slowly, imperceptibly at first. The man who once held my hand across the dinner table now scrolled endlessly on his phone, his attention always somewhere else. His business trips grew more frequent, his explanations more vague. There were hushed phone calls he'd take in his study, the door always slightly ajar, but he'd clam up the moment I approached. "Just work, Lorraine," he'd always say, his tone dismissive. "Nothing you need to worry about." I'd attributed it to the pressures of his executive role, the weight of responsibility. Our intimacy had dwindled to polite gestures, replaced by a chasm of unspoken words. I'd tell myself it was age, or stress, or simply the comfortable routine of a long-standing couple, but deep down, a seed of doubt had always lingered. A quiet, unsettling hum beneath the surface of my contentment. I'd remember how he'd brush off my suggestions for a weekend getaway, citing work, only to later learn he'd been golfing with clients or attending a last-minute conference. Small lies, easily justifiable at the time, now felt like breadcrumbs leading to this moment of devastating clarity. It wasn't just Arthur. Brenda, too, had become a source of subtle disquiet, especially in Garrett's eyes. He'd often comment, usually with a forced lightness, about how Brenda seemed to enjoy Arthur's company perhaps times 2 times much. "She's always hanging around Dad's office, Mom," he'd said once, a frown creasing his brow as he watched them from the kitchen, asking him for advice, saying he's so much wiser. I'd laughed it off then, thinking it was just Brenda being charming, trying to endear herself to her future father-in-law, but Garrett had seen something else. He'd noticed the way Brenda's hand would occasionally linger on Arthur's arm, an extra beat longer than strictly necessary, or the way her eyes would sparkle with an intensity that seemed more than just filial admiration when Arthur paid her a compliment. He'd mentioned how Arthur had insisted on buying Brenda a particularly lavish diamond necklace from Tiffany's. A thank you for helping with the wedding plans, he'd claimed. Garrett had found it excessive, almost possessive, and had expressed his discomfort. But I, ever the peacemaker, had dismissed it as a generous gesture. I'd even told Garrett, "She's just excited to be part of the family. Don't read too much into it." There were moments, now painfully clear in hindsight, when Garrett and I had exchanged uneasy glances across a crowded room, both silently acknowledging a strange dynamic we couldn't quite articulate. The most jarring was during a family dinner a few months ago. Arthur and Brenda were deep in conversation at the head of the table, their heads close, sharing private jokes and knowing smiles. They were so engrossed, they barely noticed the rest of us. Garrett had subtly cleared his throat, trying to draw their attention, but they'd only offered a fleeting, distracted glance before returning to their intimate exchange about a secret project. I remember the knot of discomfort in my stomach, the feeling that I was an outsider looking in on my own family. Garrett's eyes had met mine. A silent question passing between us, a shared flicker of concern. We both knew something was off, fundamentally unbalanced, but we had brushed it aside, attributing it to Brenda's exuberant personality and Arthur's usual charm. We wanted to believe the best, to uphold the illusion of our happy family, especially with the wedding approaching. How foolish, how incredibly naive we had been, to ignore the silent alarms ringing in our hearts, to dismiss the whispers of doubt that now screamed the truth. The truth, once a whisper, now bellowed, tearing through the carefully constructed facade of our lives. Arthur's face, pale and contorted, still stammered denials that died in his throat, while Brenda, her eyes darting between us, visibly struggled to regain her usual composure. The jasmine-scented air, moments ago a symbol of joy, now felt thick with the stench of betrayal. My own perfect world, shattered just seconds before, was now a jagged landscape of broken glass, reflecting only the ugliness of their deceit. Garrett, ever my anchor, squeezed my hand tighter, his presence a silent shield against the immediate explosion I felt building within me. For a fleeting second, every instinct screamed to unleash my fury, to rip apart the pristine white drapes, to shatter the very porcelain perfection Arthur and I had built together. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to demand answers from the man who had stolen my future and the woman who had stolen my sons. But then, I met Garrett's eyes. They were not just filled with pain, but with a deep, unsettling clarity, mirroring the resolve that had begun to simmer beneath my own shock. This wasn't a moment for impulsive, cathartic rage. This was something far deeper, far more insidious, as his earlier whisper had warned. The urge to scream subsided, replaced by a chilling calm. Arthur, still babbling incoherently, finally saw the hard, unyielding glint in both our eyes. He knew. Brenda, perhaps sensing the shift in our energy, finally pulled completely away from Arthur, straightening her dress. Though her hands trembled, neither of them dared to approach us. The living room, designed for celebration, became a silent battlefield, the unspoken declaration of war hanging heavy in the air. Garrett gently guided me away from the wretched pair, towards the relative sanctuary of the kitchen. The catering staff, thankfully, were outside, oblivious to the earthquake that had just ripped through our home. Only the hum of the refrigerator broke the silence. We stood there, mother and son, two halves of a fractured whole, tears streaming down our faces, silent and racking. My fingers traced the outline of Garrett's jaw, a face so like his father's, yet now etched with a pain Arthur had inflicted. "We can't," I choked out, the words raw and difficult. "We can't confront them. Not yet." Garrett nodded, his own voice hoarse with unshed tears. "I know, Mom. It'll just be chaos. And they'll deny everything. They'll try to twist it." His logic, even in this moment of profound agony, was chillingly sound. If we revealed our hand now, Arthur, with his cunning mind, and Brenda, with her calculated charm, would undoubtedly find a way to minimize the damage, to salvage their reputations, to discredit us. We had no concrete proof, only our eyewitness accounts and Garrett's vague, chilling premonition. We sat at the kitchen island, a space usually reserved for hurried breakfasts and light-hearted conversations, now a war room. My perfect white dress, intended for the mother of the groom, felt like a shroud. Garrett, still in his pre-wedding casual wear, looked years older than his 28. "What do we do?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "How do we prove it? How do we stop this nightmare?" His gaze, though still clouded by hurt, hardened with a growing determination. "We need answers, Mom. Real answers. Not just about this. About everything." The unspoken question hung between us. How deep did the rabbit hole go? The idea, initially a desperate emotional plea, slowly began to coalesce into a cold, calculated strategy. We couldn't just react. We had to plan. We had to strike with precision, with irrefutable evidence. We had to turn their own treachery against them. The wedding, only hours away, had to become something else entirely. It would not be a celebration of love, but a stage for the most brutal unveiling. And for that, we would need help. A specific kind of help. The name that surfaced in my mind, a beacon in the storm of my despair, was Beverly. My younger sister, 3 years my junior, had always been the pragmatist, the sharpest wit in our family, the one who saw through facades and navigated chaos with an unnerving calm. While I'd always been drawn to creating a picture-perfect world, Beverly had thrived in dissecting its imperfections. It was no surprise she'd carved out a successful career as a private investigator, a profession perfectly suited to her keen intellect and almost surgical detachment when faced with human folly. Her office, nestled discreetly in a downtown building, was her sanctuary, a place where truth, however ugly, was meticulously unearthed. It was almost midnight when I finally managed to dial her number. My voice still raw, my hands trembling as I recounted the living room scene in hushed, broken sentences. Garrett sat beside me, his hand on my back, providing silent strength. I expected shock, perhaps even an immediate outburst of sisterly outrage. Instead, Beverly's initial response was a quiet, disbelieving sigh. "Lorraine, are you absolutely sure? Arthur and Brenda? Are you certain you didn't misinterpret something?" The question, though gentle, stung. She knew how much my marriage meant to me, how I'd always defended Arthur. It wasn't a dismissal, but a professional's instinct to verify, to ensure the facts weren't tainted by emotion. But as I recounted Garrett's chilling whisper, "Mom, I already know, and it's worse than you think," and the specifics of Arthur's past evasions, Brenda's peculiar intimacy, I could almost hear the click as Beverly's PI switch flipped. Her tone shifted, hardening like cold steel. The disbelief vanished, replaced by a fierce, protective resolve that resonated deeply with my own newfound determination. "All right, Lorraine," she said, her voice now crisp, devoid of any lingering doubt. "Tell me everything. Every strange look, every hushed phone call, Every expense report. Leave nothing out. And Garrett, you too? Anything odd Brenda ever said or did? Anything about Arthur's finances that struck you as unusual? We talked for what felt like hours, detailing every uncomfortable glance, every flimsy excuse, every moment of creeping suspicion we had previously dismissed. Beverly listened intently, interrupting only to ask precise, probing questions that cut straight to the heart of the matter. She was building a case, meticulously collecting fragments of our shattered reality. They'll deny it, of course, she stated. Arthur will play the victim, Brenda the confused ingenue. We need more than eyewitness accounts. We need irrefutable proof. Something that will shut them down cold. Her words were a balm to my frantic mind, a roadmap emerging from the fog of betrayal. Garrett and I had only vague ideas, fueled by pain and anger. Beverly had a plan. First, digital footprints, she began, her mind already racing. Emails, texts, phone records. Arthur's personal and business accounts. Brenda's too. Any hidden assets. I'll start with discreet surveillance on both of them, beginning tonight. They won't know what hit them. We need to know who they're talking to, where they're going, what they're hiding. And Lorraine? Can you get me access to Arthur's office? His computer? Any physical files? Bank statements? Anything at all? The thought of invading Arthur's privacy, even after his heinous betrayal, still caused a tremor of unease, a remnant of the dutiful wife I once was. But it quickly dissipated. He had shattered all claims to privacy the moment he entangled himself with Brenda. This was no longer about marital boundaries. It was about justice, about reclaiming my life, and protecting my son. Yes, I said, my voice firm despite the underlying ache. I'll get you whatever you need. Just tell me what to do. The initial targets were clear. Arthur and Brenda. Beverly outlined a multi-pronged approach. Financial forensics, digital surveillance, and good old-fashioned stakeouts. She spoke with a calm authority that instilled confidence, transforming our raw anguish into a focused weapon. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. It was an investigation, a professional pursuit of truth, orchestrated by someone who had seen humanity at its worst and knew exactly how to expose it. My sister, the unwavering pillar of strength I hadn't realized I needed, was ready to fight. And so were we. The following days blurred into a tense, clandestine operation. Under the guise of tidying Arthur's study, I managed to slip Beverly a flash drive containing scanned documents from his computer, old bank statements, investment portfolios, even some of his personal emails. Garrett, too, meticulously gathered anything Brenda might have left behind in his apartment. Old receipts, phone bills, anything that could offer a digital crumb. Beverly and her team worked in a silent, relentless fury, pulling at every thread, tracing every digital footprint. But it was Brenda who became the first domino to fall. And her past proved to be a far darker abyss than any of us had imagined. A week after our fateful discovery, Beverly called us into her office. The space, usually a sterile landscape of file cabinets and computer screens, felt heavy with unspoken truths. On her monitor, a complex web of financial transactions, shell companies, and legal documents painted a portrait of a woman far more sinister than the charming, ambitious fiancée we thought we knew. Brenda isn't just opportunistic, Lorraine, Beverly stated, her voice devoid of emotion, simply laying out the facts like a prosecutor. She's a professional, a career embezzler. My breath caught in my throat. Garrett, who sat beside me, flinched as if struck. Beverly then detailed a history of financial fraud stretching back almost a decade, meticulously connecting Brenda to several high-profile corporate embezzlement cases across state lines. She had used a series of aliases, often adopting the guise of a rising legal star, gaining trust, then systematically siphoning funds from her employers and clients. Names of companies I'd vaguely recognized from news headlines flashed across the screen. Companies that had mysteriously gone bankrupt, or suffered massive financial losses. Brenda, our Brenda, had been at the heart of it. She'd meticulously covered her tracks, exploiting loopholes and manipulating legal systems, always emerging unscathed, ready for her next target. The money she had embezzled from her current law firm, the one Garrett had mentioned, was just the latest in a long predatory career. She wasn't building a future with Garrett. She was rebuilding her stolen fortune, positioning Arthur as her latest, most lucrative mark. "She's a master manipulator," Beverly continued, tapping a finger on a screen displaying complex financial flows. "She targets men in positions of power, leverages their trust, and then extracts as much as she can." Arthur, I'm afraid, was ripe for the picking. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Brenda hadn't just seduced my husband. She had targeted him. Perhaps even planned her engagement to Garrett as a calculated move to gain closer access to our family's wealth and Arthur's influence. The diamond necklace Arthur had bought her, the wedding planning expenses, her constant need for money for various investments, all of it suddenly snapped into focus, ugly and predatory. As sickening as Brenda's revelations were, they merely prefaced the deeper rot festering at the heart of my own marriage. Beverly, having established Brenda's criminal background, then turned her attention to Arthur. "We've started digging into Arthur's personal and business accounts," she announced, her expression grim, "and we're seeing some unsettling patterns." The first hints were subtle, almost negligible to an untrained eye. Discrepancies in the family's joint checking account, small but frequent withdrawals I hadn't authorized, always made from an ATM far from our usual haunts. Then there were the expense reports from Arthur's company, digital copies of which I'd provided. Entries for elaborate client dinners and luxury hotel stays didn't quite match up with his actual travel schedule or the names of the clients I knew. I remembered his increasingly frequent business trips, the vague explanations, the hushed phone calls. Now, those dismissed details screamed red flags. "And then there's this," Beverly said, pulling up a scanned bank statement, highlighting a series of large transfers from our primary investment account to an unfamiliar offshore account. These funds were moved over the last 2 years. Substantial amounts. "And Lorraine? These transfers would have required your signature as co-owner." My heart seized. I stared at the screen, at the bold, sweeping signature I knew so intimately, Arthur's, and next to it, a shaky, unconvincing facsimile of my own. My signature, forged, my trust, my quiet complacency, had been twisted into a weapon against me. It wasn't just infidelity, it was financial betrayal, a quiet, systematic dismantling of our shared future, orchestrated by the man who had promised to protect it. The first layers of deceit had been peeled back, revealing a raw, festering wound that ran far deeper than I could have ever imagined. This wasn't just an affair, it was a carefully constructed conspiracy, and I, the dutiful wife, had been blissfully, ignorantly trapped at its center. Just as I was trying to process the sheer audacity of Arthur forging my signature, of systematically emptying our life savings for God knows what purpose, Beverly slid another file across the gleaming surface of her desk. It was thinner than the financial reports, a simple manila folder, but its weight felt monumental, crushing. "There's something else, Lorraine," she said, her voice unusually subdued, even for her. "Something that puts all of Arthur's deceptions into a chilling new context." Garrett, his face still pale from the financial revelations, looked at me, then at the folder, his brow furrowed with a fresh wave of dread. Beverly didn't wait for us to ask. She opened the folder, pulling out a series of glossy photographs. The first showed Arthur, younger, happier, standing beside a strikingly beautiful woman with warm, intelligent eyes and a cascade of dark hair. In her arms was a baby, no older than a few months, wrapped in a pink blanket. My breath hitched. The baby had Arthur's distinctive nose, his wide-set eyes. Another photo, Arthur, older now, laughing with the same woman and a little girl, perhaps 10 or 11, at a park. The girl, with her bright smile and long dark hair, was a mirror image of the woman, and eerily, had Arthur's playful glint in her eyes. My vision blurred, the images mocking me with their undeniable joy, a joy I had never seen on Arthur's face in years. Her name is Victoria Sterling. Beverly's voice cut through the fog of my shock, each word a shard of glass. And the girl is Haley Sterling, her daughter, your husband's daughter. The world spun. Not just fractured this time, but disintegrated into microscopic dust. Victoria Sterling, Haley, a secret daughter. For 15 years, the numbers echoed in my head. A grotesque symphony of lies. 15 years. That was almost half our marriage. Half of times my times life with Arthur. Building times our times family. Creating times our times memories. All while he was living a completely parallel existence. The affair with Brenda, as devastating as it was, now seemed like a petty distraction, a fleeting dalliance compared to this monumental, systemic betrayal. This wasn't a mistake. It was a chosen life, a deliberate act of deception woven into the very fabric of his being. Beverly laid out the evidence with surgical precision. Copies of birth certificates, school records listing Arthur as the father, meticulously documented financial support payments from a separate, previously unknown account, and even carefully notarized DNA test results confirming Arthur's paternity. She detailed how Arthur had met Victoria through a mutual acquaintance years ago, how their affair had begun discreetly, and how he had, with frightening efficiency, carved out a second life for himself, maintaining 2 households, 2 families, for over a decade and a half. While I was planning Garrett's birthday parties, Arthur was attending Haley's school plays. While I was consoling him over a professional setback, he was celebrating Victoria's successes. Every business trip, every late night at the office, every subtle withdrawal of his affection from me, now had a name, a face, a sickeningly tangible reality. Garrett, who had been listening in horrified silence, finally slammed his fist on the desk. "He built an entire life behind your back, Mom," he grated, his voice thick with a pain that mirrored my own. "How could he do this? How could he do this to you?" But I couldn't speak. My throat was constricted, my lungs starved for air. The grief I felt wasn't just for the loss of my marriage, but for the loss of my entire understanding of reality. Who was Arthur, really? The man I loved, the father of my son, the pillar of my family? He was a phantom, a meticulously crafted illusion. The realization hit me with the force of a tidal wave. I hadn't just been betrayed. I had been fundamentally unknowing, a minor character in the sprawling, convoluted drama of his secret life. My loyalty, my trust, my 30 years of devotion were not just taken for granted. They had been actively exploited to facilitate his monstrous deception. The depth of his betrayal was a bottomless abyss, swallowing every cherished memory, every shared dream, every last shred of my self-worth. This wasn't just about an affair or money. This was about the theft of my identity, the erasure of my reality. I had built my world on quicksand, and Arthur had been shoveling it away, grain by grain. For 15 years, the quicksand of Arthur's double life had swallowed my past, consuming memories and twisting every shared moment into a lie. But his deceit wasn't just emotional. It was a methodical assault on our very foundation. As Beverly transitioned from the gut-wrenching revelation of Victoria and Haley, the thin manila folder was replaced by towering stacks of financial reports, each document a fresh stab at my rapidly unraveling reality, detailing the insidious erosion of our shared future. "It started subtly, Lorraine," Beverly reiterated, her voice grave, gesturing to a projection of meticulously highlighted transactions that now felt like a roadmap to my ruin. "Small, unauthorized withdrawals from your joint checking account we noticed earlier, then larger transfers from savings, systematically routed through shell companies and vanishing into offshore accounts. He didn't just spend, he siphoned. He didn't just hide, he stole." The projections blurred before my eyes, a sickening dance of numbers, dates, and names of obscure financial institutions, our 401k, the diversified portfolio we had built over decades for our golden years, the college fund earmarked for Garrett's future, all had been systematically plundered, drained like a festering wound. Not just for Brenda, but for a life he had built elsewhere. The security blanket of our shared wealth, the promise of a comfortable retirement, was gone, replaced by empty accounts and cryptic international transfers that had quietly fed his double existence for 15 years. But what truly solidified the cold, calculating nature of his betrayal, what twisted the knife deepest, was the undeniable evidence of my forged signature. It wasn't merely hinted at now, it was laid bare in sickening detail. Not just once, but dozens of times. On critical documents that should have required my full consent, loan applications against our property, waivers for early retirement fund withdrawals, even amendments to our family trust. Each Lorraine Henderson scrawled on those papers was a ghostly imitation of my own hand, a grotesque mockery of my identity and my trust. I remembered the odd moments when Arthur would bring papers home, asking me to sign them quickly, often at night, without proper review. "Just routine paperwork, darling," he'd assured me, pressing a pen into my hand. Standard financial updates. I had signed, trusting him implicitly, but Beverly showed me the actual documents. Those had been blank spaces, strategically left for his forgery. While I had unknowingly signed entirely different innocuous papers, he hadn't just stolen my money. He had stolen my consent, my signature, my very agency, turning my loyalty into a tool for my own undoing. The legal implications were terrifying, painting a damning picture of fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement. While Arthur had expertly covered his tracks, the sheer volume of evidence, combined with Brenda's own financial crimes, formed an irrefutable case. But more immediate than the legal ramifications was the crushing weight of my own financial vulnerability. Decades of careful planning, of scrimping and saving, had been wiped out by the man I had loved and trusted. My perfect world wasn't just emotionally shattered, it was financially destitute. I, Lorraine Henderson, a woman who had never worried about money, was now facing the terrifying prospect of starting over, of rebuilding from absolute zero, stripped bare of every comfort and security I had once taken for granted. The quicksand hadn't just consumed my past, it threatened to swallow my entire future. The terrifying prospect of rebuilding from absolute zero, of standing stripped bare before the world, transformed my despair into a diamond-hard resolve. The quicksand that had threatened to swallow my future now became the solid ground upon which a new, terrible purpose was forged. Garrett, his own face a mask of furious determination, reached across Beverly's desk and took my hand, his grip mirroring the unspoken pact that had formed between us. Beverly, ever the pragmatist, leaned back in her chair, her gaze sweeping over the scattered evidence, the photos of Arthur's secret family, the forged financial documents, the damning reports of Brenda's embezzlement. "So," she stated, breaking the heavy silence, "the question isn't times if times we expose them, but times how times, and times when times for maximum impact." "The wedding," Garrett said, his voice cold, devoid of the joy it should have held. "It's the perfect stage. Everyone will be there. All 300 guests, our entire family, their friends, Arthur's colleagues, Brenda's family. No escape." "Precisely." Beverly nodded, already sketching diagrams on a notepad. "We need a visual. Something undeniable. A large screen, strategically placed, playing a curated presentation of all our findings." The idea, initially shocking, settled into my mind with a chilling clarity. It wasn't merely revenge, it was a reclamation, a public dissection of the lies that had festered for so long. We began, then and there, meticulously piecing together the tapestry of their deceit. Beverly assigned roles, her command structure efficient and ruthless. Garrett took charge of the technical aspects, securing a projector, a sound system, and a discreet location for the controls. My task, the hardest, was to provide the emotional narrative, to select the specific photographs and documents that would deliver the most devastating blows. We spent days cloistered in Beverly's office, transforming grief into strategy, anger into precision. Each piece of evidence was scrutinized, organized, and integrated into a digital presentation. The photos of Arthur with Victoria and Haley were enlarged, juxtaposed with images of Arthur and me, of him with Garrett. The DNA results, irrefutable proof of Haley's paternity, were front and center. The labyrinthine financial trails of Arthur's fraud and Brenda's embezzlement were distilled into easily digestible, damning charts and graphs, complete with forged signatures glaring unmistakably at the audience. We didn't want to overwhelm. We wanted to incriminate. Every slide, every transition, every damning caption was debated, refined, rehearsed, but the climax of our meticulous planning centered on the timing. The precise times moment during the ceremony, when the truth would hit with the force of a tsunami. We considered the entrance, the vows, the ring exchange. Too early, and some might miss it. Too late, and the message might lose its potency. It has to be right after they say "I do," Garrett mused, his fingers tracing the air as if editing a film. Or, even better, just before. When the officiant asks if anyone knows any reason why they should not be lawfully wedded. A cold smile touched my lips, a grim reflection of the woman I had become. The traditional saccharine words of blessing, the very sanctity of the ceremony, would become the launchpad for their undoing. It was a perfect, poetic horror. The ultimate irony, turning their grand performance of love into the stage for their utter humiliation. We envisioned it all. The gasps, the horrified whispers, the slow dawning of comprehension on the faces of Arthur's colleagues and Brenda's unsuspecting family. My own heart, still bruised and broken, now beat with a steady, relentless rhythm, fueled by the conviction that this, and only this, would truly set us free. The hours since our meticulous planning in Beverly's office had blurred, each minute a tick of a doomsday clock leading to this day. The wedding morning arrived with a deceptively soft, golden glow, the very air vibrating with an anticipation that was both beautiful and utterly horrific. I moved through our house, a ghost in my own home, every gesture rehearsed, every smile a carefully constructed lie. My mind, usually a whirlwind of anxious thoughts, was now a calm, dark pool, reflecting only the icy clarity of our purpose. My perfect white dress, ironed and hanging, felt less like attire for a celebration, and more like armor for a battle. Arthur, oblivious and disturbingly jovial, seemed utterly untroubled. He whistled as he shaved, the familiar scent of his aftershave a jarring counterpoint to the bitterness in my soul. He moved with a lightness in his step, greeting the early arrivals of the catering staff with a hearty laugh, completely unaware that his world was about to come crashing down. He even paused to kiss my cheek, a gesture I endured with a fixed smile, the phantom touch of Brenda's lipstick still burning in my memory. "You look lovely, my dear," he'd said, completely missing the deadness in my eyes, the tremor in my hand as I poured his coffee. He was a man suspended in a blissful, ignorant bubble, and I, his wife of 30 years, was the one holding the pin. Brenda was a shimmering vision of bridal innocence, her carefully chosen gown flowing elegantly, her eyes sparkling with an almost manic joy. She flitted around, directing flower arrangements, charming the guests who began to trickle in, her voice light and musical. She even had the audacity to approach me, her hand resting briefly on my arm. "Lorraine, isn't it just the most perfect day?" she'd gushed, her face radiant. I managed a tight, "Indeed, Brenda," my voice barely above a whisper, praying she wouldn't detect the tremor of controlled rage beneath my composure. The irony of her unwitting happiness, her grand performance, was almost unbearable. She was playing the part of the radiant bride, stepping into a life of apparent bliss with my son, all while my husband, her lover and co-conspirator, watched on with pride. It was a grotesque pantomime, and I was forced to watch it unfold, minute by agonizing minute. Garrett, on the other hand, was a silent sentinel, his eyes constantly searching mine. A shared burden passing between us in unspoken glances. He moved through the preparations with a quiet efficiency. His own facade of excitement thin but convincing enough for the unsuspecting guests. He made sure the technical equipment was seamlessly integrated, the projector discreetly placed, the screen ready to descend at a moment's notice. He checked it twice, 3 times, his jaw tight with suppressed emotion. The tension between us was a palpable thing, a taut wire stretched to breaking point, vibrating with the energy of the imminent storm. By mid-afternoon, the house and garden were a hive of activity. Car after car pulled up the winding driveway, disgorging our closest friends, Arthur's business associates, Brenda's extended family, and our own relatives, all dressed in their finest, their faces beaming with anticipation. 300 guests. A sea of well-wishers, all gathered to celebrate a union built on the rotten foundation of deceit. The string quartet, now in full swing, filled the air with classical melodies, a soundtrack to the grand illusion. Laughter mingled with the clinking of glasses as champagne flutes were passed around. Every detail was meticulously arranged for perfection. The fragrant roses, the shimmering silk, the soft glow of fairy lights twinkling in the garden. It was everything a dream wedding should be, a picture-perfect scene of familial joy and shared happiness. And that was the cruelest irony of all. Amidst the joyous din, the innocent smiles, the genuine warmth emanating from our guests, Arthur and Brenda basked in the glow of their deception, completely oblivious to the carefully constructed trap that awaited them. They moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations, exchanging charming banter, 2 snakes in a garden of paradise, unaware that the venom was about to be turned against them. My heart hammered against my ribs. A wild bird desperate for escape. Yet I held myself rigidly, maintaining the facade of a proud mother, a gracious hostess. This perfect setting, this beautiful stage, was not for a celebration of love. It was for a reckoning, a public dissection of the lies that had poisoned our lives, and I was about to open the curtain. The string quartet swelled into a final triumphant flourish as the officiant, a kindly man with a booming voice, cleared his throat, ready to ask the fateful question, but before he could utter a single word, I rose from my front row seat, the rustle of my white dress, a surprisingly loud declaration in the hushed garden. Garrett, a silent shadow by the sound tech's booth, pressed a button. The projector, seamlessly integrated into the landscape lighting, hummed to life. On the pristine white screen, which had been subtly lowered behind the altar, an image materialized, replacing the scenic backdrop of climbing roses. It was a photograph. Arthur, his arm undeniably wrapped around Brenda, their lips locked in a fervent kiss, taken just hours ago in my living room. A collective gasp rippled through the 300 guests, a wave of confusion quickly morphing into horrified recognition. Arthur, who had been beaming beside a confused Brenda, looked like he'd seen a ghost, his face draining of all color. Brenda's radiant smile withered, replaced by a mask of sheer panic. My voice, when it came, was clear and steady, amplified by the carefully placed microphones. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, each word carefully enunciated, "we are not here today to celebrate a union of love, but a monument to deceit. A monument built by Arthur Henderson and Brenda Davies." The screen flashed again. Now, images of Arthur, younger, happier, cavorting with a woman named Victoria Sterling and a young girl Haley, filled the screen. Birth certificates, school records, bank statements showing meticulous financial support, and finally, DNA results confirming Arthur's paternity, scrolled relentlessly across the pristine white surface. The whispers grew into a frantic buzz. People pointed, gasped. Arthur's colleagues looked aghast. His family members recoiled in shock. His mother, my former mother-in-law, clutched her chest, her face pale as death. "For 15 years, I continued, my gaze fixed on Arthur, who stood frozen, his eyes wide with terror. My husband maintained a secret life, a secret family, but his betrayal runs even deeper. The screen transitioned to damning financial spreadsheets, highlighted bank transfers, empty retirement fund statements, and the glaring, unmistakable forged signatures on legal documents. He systematically emptied our shared accounts, stole my inheritance, and forged my signature, leaving me financially ruined. Gasps turned to outraged murmurs. Brenda, who had been trying to shrink into herself, now looked like she might bolt. And Brenda, I enunciated, letting the name hang heavy in the air. The woman my son was about to marry is not an innocent victim. She is a career embezzler, using her charm and cunning to exploit those around her, including Arthur, and now, my son. The screen then displayed mugshots, legal documents from past cases, detailed financial flows exposing her years of fraud. Her meticulously crafted facade crumbled completely. Suddenly, from the periphery of the garden, two uniformed officers stepped forward. Their presence an abrupt, stark contrast to the festive decor. They moved with purpose, directly towards Brenda. "Brenda Davies," one officer stated, his voice firm. "You are under arrest for multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement." Brenda screamed, a high, piercing sound of pure terror. As the officers closed in, her shimmering white dress a cruel mockery of purity, she struggled, her desperate cries echoing through the garden. But it was useless. They quickly cuffed her, leading her away through the stunned crowd, her face a mask of furious, tear-streaked defeat. Arthur, seeing Brenda apprehended, suddenly snapped out of his catatonic state. His eyes, wild with panic, darted around, searching for an escape route. Before anyone could react, he lunged, pushing past his bewildered best man, scrambling over the carefully arranged floral arch, and disappearing into the dense shrubbery at the far end of the garden. He fled, a coward unmasked, leaving behind a wake of utter devastation. The garden erupted. Cries of disbelief, shouts of outrage, the frantic chatter of 300 voices colliding in a cacophony of chaos. Friends and family members huddled together, trying to piece together the shattered remnants of what they thought they knew. Some rushed to console Garrett, who stood beside me, his arm now wrapped around my trembling shoulders, his face grim but resolute. Others stared at the blank screen, then at the empty altar, their minds struggling to comprehend the monstrous truth that had just been unleashed. I stood there, center stage, the spotlight of truth now burning brightly on me, no longer a hidden lie. My heart, though still aching, felt a strange, fierce sense of liberation. The illusion was dead, the curtain had truly fallen, not on a wedding, but on a lifetime of deceit, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could finally breathe. The initial pandemonium began to recede, leaving behind a stunned silence punctuated by hushed conversations, and the distant wail of police sirens approaching the property. The officers who had apprehended Brenda were now systematically taking statements from various shocked guests, their sober presence a stark contrast to the festive floral arrangements. Garrett, his arm still a firm anchor around me, leaned in. "Are you okay, Mom?" he whispered, his voice laced with concern, despite the grim satisfaction in his eyes. I merely nodded, unable to form words, absorbing the sheer weight of what had just transpired. Beverly, ever the professional, was already speaking calmly with the lead detective, providing him with a summary of the evidence and detailing the charges against Brenda. She glanced at me, a silent message of reassurance passing between us. The wedding guests, a bewildered tableau of silk and lace, slowly began to disperse, some offering hesitant condolences, others simply escaping the suffocating atmosphere of shattered illusions. I watched them go, a parade of pity and judgment, but felt oddly detached. Their opinions no longer held sway. My world had imploded, and in its ashes, a new clarity was emerging. That evening, long after the last guest had departed, and the police had concluded their initial questioning, Garrett, Beverly and I gathered in my now empty living room. The residual scent of jasmine and roses felt like a cruel joke, The celebratory food sat untouched in the kitchen, a monument to a wedding that never was. "We need to move quickly," Beverly stated, her voice brisk, cutting through the exhaustion that threatened to engulf me. "Arthur's likely gone into hiding, but he won't be able to stay off the grid forever. We need to freeze all his assets, secure what little is left of yours, and initiate divorce proceedings immediately." The word divorce hung in the air, heavy with finality. It was a formal acknowledgement of the death of my marriage, a necessary legal step, yet still a painful wrench. Beverly had already contacted a top divorce attorney, specializing in complex financial fraud cases. We reviewed documents for hours, detailing the forged signatures, the embezzled funds, the existence of Haley, all of which would be crucial in court. Garrett meticulously copied every piece of evidence, creating multiple backups. The goal wasn't just to separate from Arthur, but to hold him accountable for every last penny he had stolen, every lie he had woven. The next morning, the local news channels were ablaze. Wedding day shocker, groom's father exposed in extramarital affair, financial fraud and secret family, bride to be arrested for embezzlement. The headlines screamed, accompanied by blurry photos taken by quick-thinking guests, Brenda in handcuffs, Arthur scrambling through the bushes, and even a grainy shot of me standing at the altar. Our carefully guarded privacy was shattered, laid bare for public consumption. My phone rang incessantly with calls from friends, acquaintances, and even distant relatives, a mix of genuine concern, thinly veiled curiosity, and outright condemnation. Some expressed sympathy for my plight. Others questioned my ignorance, wondering how I could have been so blind for so long. Garrett shielded me as much as possible, answering calls, filtering messages, and issuing a brief statement through Beverly's office, confirming the police investigation and our intention to pursue legal action against both Arthur and Brenda. The shame was immense, a heavy cloak I felt I could never shed, but beneath it, a tiny flicker of something else ignited: relief. The truth, however brutal, was finally out. The lies were gone, and for the first time in decades, I was no longer living in Arthur's shadow. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with legal battles and public humiliation. But I was no longer alone, and I was no longer blind. The immediate storm had passed, leaving behind not quiet, but a cacophony of echoes that reverberated through the ensuing weeks. The legal battles commenced with a ferocity that matched the public spectacle. Each document served a fresh reminder of Arthur's calculated cruelty. News cycles eventually moved on, but the whispers lingered, sharp and relentless, dissecting my life, my marriage, my supposed blindness. Garrett was my steadfast rock, Beverly my sharp-edged shield, navigating the onslaught of public scrutiny and legal complexities with unwavering focus. Yet, even with their support, I walked through a landscape of emotional rubble, sifting through the debris of 30 years, trying to discern what was real from what was always a lie. There were days when the anger was a consuming fire, burning through every cell, leaving nothing but scorched earth. How could he? How could I have been so foolish? The grief was a different beast, a suffocating blanket woven from shattered dreams and stolen moments, for the man I thought I knew was gone, replaced by a stranger, a villain. I mourned not just my marriage, but the version of myself who had inhabited it, the trusting wife, the content homemaker, the woman who believed in the inherent goodness of her husband. That woman was dead, and her resurrection felt impossible. But amidst the desolation, with Beverly relentlessly securing my financial future from Arthur's clutches, his empire crumbling as swiftly as ours had, his professional reputation in tatters, a consequence of his decades of deceit finally catching up, and Garrett's quiet strength always present, a different kind of resolve began to grow. It wasn't about revenge anymore. Not truly. It was about survival. And then, slowly, about rebuilding. It was about finding peace, not for Arthur's sake, but for my own. The initial shock of Haley's existence had been overshadowed by the financial devastation and the public exposure. But as the legal dust began to settle, her name, her face from those stolen photographs, began to surface in my thoughts. Not as a symbol of Arthur's betrayal, but as a silent, innocent victim. She was, after all, Garrett's sister, a tangible link to a side of Arthur none of us had ever known. It was Garrett, in his quiet, thoughtful way, who first suggested we reach out. "She didn't ask for any of this, Mom," he'd said, his voice tinged with a new kind of empathy. "She deserves to know us, just as we deserve to know her." The idea was daunting, terrifying even, yet I found myself nodding. There was a fragile curiosity, a nascent longing to understand this secret daughter, to see if any good could possibly emerge from such profound deceit. The meeting was arranged carefully by Beverly, a neutral cafe in a quiet part of town, far from prying eyes. My heart hammered against my ribs as Garrett and I sat waiting, the scent of fresh coffee unable to mask my apprehension. Then she walked in. Haley Sterling, 15 years old, with the same dark, intelligent eyes as her mother, Victoria, but unmistakably Arthur's nose. Arthur's stubborn, set to her chin. She was slender, poised, and carried herself with an air of quiet self-possession that belied her youth. There was an initial awkwardness, a palpable tension as we navigated the unspoken complexities of our shared fractured history. I saw the questions in her eyes, the echo of my own pain. Garrett, bless him, broke the ice with a gentle smile and a simple, "Hi, Haley. I'm Garrett, your brother." The word brother hung in the air, a fragile bridge connecting two disparate worlds. We talked, tentatively at first, about small things. School, hobbies, her hopes for the future. I learned she loved to read, that she played the violin, that she dreamed of becoming an architect. She was bright, articulate, and utterly innocent in Arthur's schemes. Slowly, painstakingly, the wall around my heart began to crack. She wasn't an embodiment of Arthur's lies. She was a young woman, a person, thrust into a reality, not of her making, just like us. There was a raw tenderness in her gaze when she spoke of her mother, a quiet strength that resonated deeply. That first meeting blossomed into many more. Garrett, ever protective, took Haley under his wing, sharing stories, helping her with homework, gradually building a bond that transcended the messy circumstances of their shared paternity. I, too, found myself drawn to her. We talked for hours, sometimes just quietly existing in each other's presence. She asked me about Arthur, about our life, seeking answers I wasn't always ready to give, but always with a gentle curiosity, never judgment. And in those shared conversations, in the quiet understanding that grew between us, the outlines of a new, unconventional family began to emerge. It was a family born not of traditional expectations, but of shared truth, mutual respect, and a profound, if unexpected, love. Our wounds were still fresh, but with Garrett's unwavering support and Haley's gentle presence, a path towards genuine healing, towards a different kind of happy, was finally opening before me. We were charting a new course. 3 disparate souls knit together by betrayal, forging a future built on honesty, resilience, and the quiet, comforting rhythm of an authentic connection. The quiet, comforting rhythm of that authentic connection grew stronger with each passing day, weaving a new tapestry of my life, vibrant and real. The raw wounds of betrayal, though still present, no longer festered. They began to scar, forming intricate patterns of resilience on my soul. I learned to differentiate between the grief for what was lost and the anger at how it was taken. The latter, I discovered, was a heavier burden than the former. Forgiveness, then, became not an act for Arthur, but a necessary liberation for myself. It wasn't about condoning his monstrous deceptions, nor was it about granting him absolution he didn't deserve. It was about releasing the bitterness that tethered me to him, about severing the last invisible chain that bound me to a past built on lies. I didn't forget, and I would never trust him again. But I let go of the consuming rage, allowing the space it once occupied to be filled with a hard-won, quiet peace. With this internal shift, the foundation with Garrett and Haley solidified into something unbreakable. Garrett, my steadfast anchor through the storm, blossomed into an even more remarkable man. He found love again, a profound and genuine connection with a woman who understood the complexities of our new family, who saw his strength and respected the journey he had taken. Our bond deepened, forged in the crucible of shared pain and mutual support. We celebrated holidays differently now, sometimes just the three of us, Garrett, Haley, and me, creating new traditions, laughter filling the spaces where unspoken tension once resided. Haley, now fully integrated into our lives, proved to be a balm to my aching heart. Her presence wasn't a constant reminder of Arthur's infidelity, but a testament to the unexpected beauty that could emerge from wreckage. She brought a youthful vibrancy, a fresh perspective, and a deep, quiet gratitude for the family she had found. She and Garrett shared an easy camaraderie, a sibling bond that felt both natural and miraculously resilient. I even found a comfortable, respectful understanding with Victoria Sterling, Haley's mother, recognizing her as another victim of Arthur's elaborate charade, a woman who had, in her own way, simply tried to protect her daughter. Our interactions, though infrequent, were always marked by a silent acknowledgement of our shared past and a mutual commitment to Haley's well-being. The future, once a terrifying void, now stretched before me, an open canvas. I sold the large house, shedding the last physical vestiges of my former life, and moved into a smaller, sun-drenched cottage by the sea. It was a space I made entirely my own, filled with books, art, and the comforting rhythm of the ocean. I pursued old hobbies I had long neglected, started volunteering at a local animal shelter, and even considered taking a few university courses, simply for the joy of learning. There was a lightness in my step, a genuine smile that reached my eyes, a feeling of self-sufficiency that was both empowering and profoundly satisfying. I embraced a life built on absolute truth, where every interaction was genuine, every emotion authentic. The genuine love I felt for Garrett and Haley, for Beverly and the few true friends who had stood by me, was a stark contrast to the hollow affection I had once mistaken for happiness. My journey had been one of destruction and rebirth, a painful testament to the deceptive nature of appearances. I had faced the ultimate betrayal and emerged, not unscathed, but undeniably stronger. The meaning of family had irrevocably shifted for me. It wasn't about blood or tradition alone, but about who showed up, who stayed, who shared your truth, and who loved you unconditionally, even when your world was falling apart. Resilience, I realized, wasn't about enduring without breaking, but about breaking apart and finding the courage to meticulously piece yourself back together, not into the old pattern, but into something entirely new, stronger, and more authentic. Moving forward wasn't about forgetting the past, but about letting it inform the present, using its lessons to illuminate the path ahead. I was no longer Lorraine, the perfect wife in the perfect marriage. I was Lorraine, a woman who had faced her darkest fears, survived and found a different kind of happy, a happy built on truth, chosen love, and an unwavering belief in her own indomitable spirit.